Hi everyone, this video is for the Mozart Sinfonia Concertante Viola 2-part. I figured I'd have us start out with the E flat major scale so we can get our fingers all ready to play this piece and get our intonation in check. So, one thing to remember is the hand frame for this scale. We're going to start on a low 2 on the C string on E flat, and 2 will always stay low through this scale, as well as low first fingers, and then on the D string for A flat, low fourth finger. So this scale is going to sound like this, and we'll do 2 octaves. When you're playing your scales, it's really important to make sure that you are really listening to your intonation. So if you're having trouble hearing some of the intonation in the scale, what I like to do is play along with a drone. So I would put an E flat drone on, and a lot of tuners will have drone options like mine does, or you can look up on YouTube E flat drone and there's lots of options. So this is what that sounds like. I'll play just 1 octave of the scale. So I had to adjust for some of those pitches, and if you need to, it's always okay to linger on notes to adjust and really hear what you're doing. So something else I like to do, in addition to doing scales, is to play the important notes of the scale to get my hands ready for the piece. So that would be the first note of the scale, E flat, the 4th note of the scale, A flat, and the 5th note of the scale, B flat, and then back to E flat. So that would sound like this, and I'll play it with the drone. You can also do this and keep going up the scale. So my A flat was a little bit wobbly, so I'm going to go back and do that higher octave again. And that should get you ready to play in the key of E flat major. So now that our fingers are all ready to play in the key of this piece, I want to talk about syncopation, because it happens a lot in this piece, and it happens a lot in any Mozart you'll play, as well as lots of other composers. So syncopation is where we're playing off the beat on purpose, and it kind of creates this off-kilter feel, and it's really fun. But it can be pretty tricky rhythmically to get it down. So one thing that's really helpful is to play with a metronome, and the specific spot I'm looking at is 3 measures after letter A. So let me just play that for you with a metronome first. So one thing that's really important about this style is that we're separating the quarter notes. And that kind of helps us stay in the rhythm of it, and it helps make it a little bit less muddy. So we kind of accent the beats a little bit. well, the offbeats we're accenting. If you're having trouble with this, it can be really helpful to make sure you're subdividing so you're feeling the eighth notes, and there's 2 eighth notes per every quarter note. So one thing I like to do is put the metronome double of what I was just playing it at. So now I'll demonstrate that. And that really helped me feel each eighth note and stay really consistent through those bars. So you can practice that yourself, and then we'll move on. And now we're just going to back up a couple bars to right at letter A, and I want to talk about the bow stroke for this. So most of the time in Mozart we have a bouncy bow for eighth notes, and especially in this passage on our C string and our G string. So this is what this passage will sound like with the metronome. So my bow is kind of scooping into the string. And way to practice that is just to use open strings. So to keep with practicing the music, you can just take the fingering out and take the notes out and just play your open strings where they would happen naturally in the music. So I'll do that with the metronome. Oops. And then you can add your fingers back in. So one important thing is that I'm always staying near the frog and the balance point, because that's the bounciest part of the bow. And it helps to be closer to the bridge for this as well, because that's a little bit more bouncy than up here. And it's also forte, so it helps us out to be at the bridge. Now we can put that passage all together. So I'll start at letter A, and then I'll go until measure 36 with the metronome. So in that passage, we also run into some 16th notes. And if you'll notice, I was not using very much bow, but it's still pretty energetic. Because if we use too much bow, it's too loud and it's just really muddy, and that's not really Mozart. We want to sound still really crisp and energized. So not too much bow, and we'll be in the middle of the bow. And that will really create the sound that we want there. And also, if you'll notice, I'm still separating in the quarter notes even when it's not syncopated. So like at the end of this passage, there's still space between those notes and a little bit more weight on the front of each note. And a little bit of vibrato. The next passage that we'll look at is measure 46. And in the viola 2 part, there's a little bit of a chromatic line going through these 16th notes, and the 16th note stroke is the same as what I just talked about in the last passage. But first, I want to make sure we're getting all these accidentals, so I'm going to play through until measure 57 without the 16th notes, so just playing with normal bow. It's a really cool line, and we're kind of supporting the violins through that because they're also playing a chromatic passage. And I think most everyone else is just staying on E flat through this passage, so it's really cool when we get a moving line like that. So now I'll put the metronome on and we'll pay attention to the dynamics and play the 16th notes this time. So, as we get louder, I did need to use more bow, like once we got to the crescendo. But it's still not too much, and still really crisp. So that's what that should sound like. Okay, and the next passage will be at measure 158, and this is probably one of the trickier passages in this piece, and only the second violas get it. They kind of become the cello section in this spot with these ascending, descending scales. There's lots of accidentals, so we're gonna start out going really slow, like half tempo. We'll put the metronome at like 60. Okay. So with the metronome going quite a bit slower, we'll play through this passage, and it goes until 164, or actually 163, and we'll do this just to get the notes, not worrying about what the bow should sound like, just getting those accidentals in our fingers. So that'll sound like this. Now, if that is, let me turn this off. If that is still a little too fast for you, you can take the metronome down as much as you need to. Just still using a metronome because we want to keep that internal pulse still. Once you feel really confident with the notes, we're going to take the metronome up to about 75% of the tempo. And what we're gonna do is split up the bar in two chunks. So we'll play two groups of 16th notes, pause, and then the second group of 16th notes and pause, and do that for the whole passage. So that'll sound like this. And so on. And then once you feel pretty good about that, we'll do the same thing, but adding the first note of the next group of 16th notes. And do that for the whole passage. Another really great way to practice fast passages like this is to use rhythms. So with the metronome on, and I'm gonna stay around 75% of the tempo still, we'll do a dotted 16th note rhythm. So that'll sound like this. And then we'll reverse it, so it'll be 16th dotted 8th note. And with doing these, you can slow down the metronome as much as you want and start bumping it up as you go. So I'm at 75% tempo, and I can put it up to about 100% tempo around here, and do all of those things we just talked about. So the first one is splitting it up in chunks. And then adding the first note of the next chunk. And then doing rhythms. So doing these little tricks and practice techniques, they can be a little bit egregious sometimes, but they really do help our brains slow down and take in what we're supposed to be playing, and gives our fingers that downtime so that we can prepare and play through. And then after you do all these things, you can play through the whole passage, and it's a lot easier. So now I'll play the passage through at, about full tempo. I'm still a little bit slower than full tempo, but I think you'll get the idea. And this kind of passage happens again on the next page in measure 328. And you can use all those same practice techniques that I just talked about to work on that passage as well. The notes are just a little bit different. So I'll just play through that passage for you, and then you can go through it yourself and do all those little techniques. So that should sound like that. And don't get too freaked out about playing fast. A little bit every day goes a long way. So if you practice both of these passages for 15 minutes every day or every other day until we get to camp, you will be far above prepared. And one last note when practicing these faster passages is to keep your shoulder and your arm, your wrist, and your fingers and your right hand relaxed. And if you start to feel tense or any pain, it's always a good idea to stop and take a break, do some stretches. If you ever have any questions about what stretches to do, you can always ask me. I know a lot about feeling pain during playing, and it really sucks, so we really want to catch it when it's early. Next, I want to talk about measure 58, the little passage here that is such a cool viola moment. It sounds like this. want to talk about the trills. So the trills will be coming from the note above the written note. So the first one is a written E flat, so we'll be going instead of, we'll be starting with our second finger, like that. And then I have two fingering options for the second trill, and that's in measure 60. So you can do in first position, starting on D with your fourth finger. Or you can shift to a second finger for the C and go to second position, and you'd be playing the D for the trill with your third finger, and it's a whole step. And then you would go back to first position for your first finger on the E flat. So I'll play that again in the second position. So it's up to you to pick which fingering you'd like to do. It depends on if your hand can reach the fourth finger here, how comfortable you are in second position, but those are the options there. And one last thing about the trills is that we want to have a lot of energy, especially just on the first trill. So that can come from the bow, actually. So I'll put not a lot of energy and see what it sounds like. See how it kind of floated into it. We really want to have a punch on the trill, so we're gonna sink our bow into the string when we start the trill. So I'll play that passage one more time with lots of energy, and you can play along with me if you want. So that's everything for this video. I really hope that this gives you enough tools to work up to camp. If you have any questions about the music, you can always ask me through email or text. And I hope you're really excited to play this music, because I'm really excited to play it with you all.